Well, according to the U.S. Senate, the NATO treaty supersedes the U.S. Constitution. Senator Rand Paul and I think about 28 Republicans who voted for it, or no, was it 16? I think it was 16. I think it was like 80 some senators voted against this. Introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the bill that they have every year, which reauthorizes the standing army. Because for those, it's a little known fact in America, having a standing army is actually illegal. It's unconstitutional. Congress cannot just create a standing army. They can only, create an army for, I think it's up to 12 months. So I think they have to pass it every year. And Congress has been doing that since the end of the Civil War. They just keep reauthorizing the Army, and the Army has never gone away, even though constitutionally, when we're not in a time of war, the idea is that the military's authorization from Congress is supposed to expire, and all the soldiers are supposed to go home. So that's why we have this bill every year. It's the biggest, I'm sure, biggest spending bill for Congress in any calendar year, because the military is the biggest part of the budget, and this bill is supposed to fund the entirety of the military. Of course, there's a lot of off-balance sheet expenses, billions and billions and billions that we're just not allowed to know about, because those are like Black Ops and the CIA. We're not allowed to know what their budget is. We're not allowed what they spend, how much they spend. The military is authorized to spend a certain amount of money, and then they spend whatever they want on top of that, and Congress just has to fork it over. So, just a little thing, maybe next time you see a soldier, an American soldier, remind yourself not to thank them for their service, because it is we who serve them. The military tells us what we will pay them. It's interesting how that works. But anyway, despite all that, the Congress still goes through the charade of passing a budget and an act of Congress that is supposed to outline the duties and of the military and what all their rights are and all these things. And so Rand Paul slipped in this amendment that said, hey, if NATO Article 5 is triggered, that doesn't automatically mean that we are at war, because only Congress can declare war. And so even if a NATO member state invokes Article 5 of the treaty, the U.S. would still have to formally declare war before we are at war. Seems pretty simple, because that is what the Constitution says. It says, oh yeah, only Congress can declare war. Well, the Senate smacked that down. They absolutely do not believe that it is Congress who declares war. I guess it would be Zelensky who declares war. I guess it would be Sanna Marin, the coke-snorting Prime Minister of Finland, or her potential replacement, the guy who was doing Zig Heils in, he was naked in a sauna. Or is it going to go to, who else, other NATO members? Olaf Scholz, does he get to decide when the U.S. goes to war? Is he the one who gets to declare war on behalf of America? Is that how that works? Well, according to the U.S. Senate, yes. That is exactly how it works. Congress has just abdicated all authority. First they abdicated authority on war to the President of the United States. We haven't had Congress declare war a single time since they declared war on Germany way back in 1941, right? Or was it? Or by the time they declared war, maybe it was 42. I forget the exact dates of the declaration of war. I know that it came after Japan, because Japan was the main issue. And actually, the U.S. only declared war on Germany after Germany declared war on the U.S. Originally, the U.S. was attacked by Japan, and so the U.S. declared war on Japan. They had no interest in fighting the war in Europe, but Hitler decided to declare war on America, which was stupid. Gave American politicians perfect excuse to declare war back on Germany, which otherwise the American people wouldn't have been supportive of. They had no interest in getting involved in the war in Europe. Even still, when you see most stories about the American experience during World War II, they're referencing the Pacific. That really was America's war. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. I'm getting off on tangents. That's what happens when you get repeatedly only 4 hours of sleep. You start to lose yourself a little bit. Well, anyway, despite the fact that Congress has not declared war since around 1942, we still have had many wars ever since then. We had Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, the first Iraq War, or the second Persian Gulf War, depending on how you want to look at it. Then we had the second Iraq War, and then we had perhaps a third Iraq War, depending on how you want to count it. We had the war in Syria, the war in Libya, the war in Somalia, which is still going on, and a bunch of overseas contingency operations, as Barack Obama would call them, and a bunch of other different places that are too small really to mention here. None of which was, authorized by an act of war or by a declaration of war by Congress. They had their very nebulous authorization of use of military force, which was just a blank check written to the president, so that he could make war anywhere he wanted on the planet. And so now Congress was not content with just giving up our authority or their authority to declare war to the president. They now have abdicated it to Brussels, I suppose, to NATO headquarters. That's who gets to declare war on behalf of America. It's not even the president's choice anymore, because an amendment which did pass to the NDAA was brought up by Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, and his amendment was to make it illegal for the President of the United States to withdraw from NATO or to even denounce NATO. It's illegal for the President to denounce NATO. Think about that. And he said without, 2/3 of the Senate, which is hilarious. What the Senate wants to have control over is not whether or not the U.S. goes to war. They want to have control. They want to have essentially veto power over the U.S. not going into war. So they want the president to have to get the Senate's affirmative consent to not go to war. That's where we're at in America. You'll have NATO headquarters in Brussels saying Article 5 has been invoked by West Ukraine, and all NATO countries, meaning America, because we're the one that actually has a military, you're going to have to go fight for Ukraine. You're going to die in Europe. And the President of the United States says, I don't think that's probably a good idea. I think that we should probably stay out of this one. He's going to have to go now to the Senate and get 2/3 of the Senate to agree with him, which is not going to happen, especially if he's a Republican president. And so that means that the U.S. will be gridlocked, and the default, if there is gridlock, is that the U.S. somehow just ends up at war in Europe, because the NATO treaty was invoked. And Congress doesn't have to approve the war. In fact, they have to approve the president keeping us out of the war by withdrawing from NATO. Because if the treaty says, hey, you have to go, and NATO headquarters says, hey, it's time for a war, America, and America says, no, I don't think so, well, then they would have to withdraw from the treaty. That's what that would mean. And so the Senate this week is making it clear their intention to box us in, so that once the war comes, the American people have no means of resistance. And the next thing you know, they'll be drafting your daughters. and what are you going to do if they come in knocking on your door wanting to take your 18-year-old daughter away and send her off to boot camp? Are you going to become an insurrectionist? Are you going to fight against the regime? Are you going to become a terrorist just like all those dirty Trump supporters? That's what it means when you denounce NATO, which is soon to be illegal. Gee, what's the penalty if a president denounces NATO? If the president comes out and says, you know what, NATO sucks, I know Article 5 has been invoked, but I have no intention of helping them, and all this, and he completely undermines, the trust in NATO, Well, that's a denunciation of NATO, but what is NATO worth once people realize, hey, the President of the United States is not real interested in supporting NATO? You know, I know technically the U.S. is still in the treaty because the Senate says that the President can't pull them out of the treaty. And so at this point, what it sounds like is that the military is answering to a higher power than the commander-in-chief. If the military is told you no longer take orders from the commander-in-chief, then that means that we have a coup. Because the military would have to go against the president's orders. They would have to seemingly arrest him for denouncing NATO and trying to withdraw. And then they would march off to Europe. So the president of the United States would end up in prison, and all the troops would end up in Europe, where they would be blown apart by tactical nukes, and they would respond with their own tactical nukes, and then we'd have the end of the world. There truly is no end to this madness. And you could walk into the office of any one of these people, and I could go over this with them, and they'd probably just say, well, you're a bigot. You probably don't like black people. Because we are run, not just by idiots, but because these people are not, it's not like they're all low IQ. I mean, you have some people like Maxine Waters, who obviously are not all there, or people like Joe Biden, who are just senile. And actually, I think Maxine Waters is probably a combination of both. But anyway, even if you find one who's totally lucid, these people, they have no sense of limits. They don't believe that the laws of gravity and of cause and effect apply to them. They believe in idealism. You know, I think, therefore I am. We, the Senate, believe that the U.S. is the sole global superpower. And as long as we say so, well, that's true, and everyone else has to bow down before us. It doesn't matter if we go to war with Russia. They wouldn't use nukes against us, but we probably can use nukes against them. They're not to that point yet, but they'll say that eventually, because they always keep escalating. And next it'll be, sure, we can nuke Beijing. That won't lead to any problems. There will be no reaction to that. I mean, that's the logical conclusion here. These people believe in no limits, except limiting on dialing things back. They want this to work like a ratchet, okay? They want to be able to ratchet tension and then never release it. There's going to be no release lever. There's no pull cord. There's no, in case of emergency, break glass. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow. Hopefully we're all still here. You never know. It could all end tonight. It could end any night, but if you live in fear, then you'll truly never live a day in your life now, will you?